Line when you're ready. Can you give us a nod, please? Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Doug Shipman. I'm Mayor of the City of Clarence, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here for Clarence City Council's meeting tonight. Could I ask you to stand to join me in the council prayer, please? Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosperous deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. Before sitting, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Thank you. I do need to remind everyone present that we are live streaming this meeting via YouTube, and a copy of the full agenda is available on Council's website. Before proceeding further, I'd like to advise Council of the passing of Mr Andrew Charlton. Andrew served on Council from 1976 to 1982, and I'd like to extend on our behalf condolences to his family. I'd also like to advise with great sadness the passing of Mr Dallas Highland. Dal made a significant contribution to community life in the City of Clarence for over 30 years as a volunteer. He was a dedicated member of the Bellreef Historical Society, Bellreef Bluff Land and Coast Care Group Incorporated, and he also coordinated the opening, closing and caring for the Bellreef Bluff battery site each day for many, many years. Dal was recognised earlier this year as a Clarence Citizen of the Year, and our condolences are extended to his family and friends.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move a motion on behalf of Council that we officially recognise the contribution that Dal Highland made to the community over many years, and send condolences to Kathleen and the rest of his family.
Thank you.
Second that motion.
Thank you, Alderman Moulder. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Moving on to the meeting agenda. Firstly, apologies. Alderman Pearce is not yet with us, but I am expecting him later this evening. He's tied up now. I'd now like to move through items 2, 3, 4, 6, 10 and 11.1 with an omnibus motion. So we'll deal with each of those in turn. Firstly, confirmation of the minutes of the 12th of October. As circulated, be taken as read and confirmed.
Mayor, I'd just like to seek clarification in relation, to the motion that was, it was lost at the last meeting in relation to the flying of the Aboriginal flag. And I would like just to draw attention to the fact that there is a matter that, and I'm quoting from Renton, it says 434, generally speaking, a chairman should not accept a motion which is inconsistent with a resolution previously adopted. The existing resolution should firstly be formally rescinded. I refer to the notice of motion that's been listed tonight with respect to the flag, and part A of the motion is identical to the part A that was part of the motion that was lost at the last meeting. I seek clarification and your ruling, please.
Thanks, Alderman James. I'm just wondering how we rescind a non-decision.
Well, with respect to the Mayor, it was a motion that was
It was lost. There was no decision taken, and therefore my ruling is that there's nothing to take back.
Okay,
Thank you. Moving on to item 3, Mayor's communication, I'd like to submit a list of meetings and attendances of myself and the Deputy Mayor over the last 3 weeks. Table that. Yes, thanks. Item 4 is that Council Notes workshops conducted on the 19th and 26th of October, agenda brief on 30th of October. No questions there. Item 6 is tabling of petitions. Are there any petitions to table? No. Thank you. Item 10, reports from outside bodies. The Copying Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority. Is that September quarterly report still pending? Alderman Walker, did you wish to add to that?
Yes, I do. We will be having the AGM later this month, so I would expect the quarterly report will be received at our council meeting, which is preceding the annual general meeting of that authority.
Thank you. In regard to Taswater, there's Owners Representative Group meeting in Launceston, which I will be attending on Wednesday, and there's nothing to report under the Greater Hobart Act committees. Moving on to 10.2, reports from Council and Special Committees. Firstly, we've got the Tracks and Trails Advisory Committee that the Chairperson's report be received. Are there any questions or comments in regard to that? Moving on to the Bicycle Advisory Committee quarterly report. Once again, any comments on that?
Well, I don't comment, Mr Mayor, in relation to the, thank the staff involved in the Tracks and Trails and the Bike Committee and also the Sport and Recreation space. There's a lot of work going on in that area at the moment, and there's a hell of a lot of not only delivery of actual projects and things that have been approved in the past, but the master planning that's going on at the moment and some of the policy development that we're doing in that space is quite complex, and I think it's and also thank the community representatives that are involved in those committees as well. They provide a big benefit to the whole community, and I think we're doing a lot of good work in that space.
Thank you. The NRM quarterly report. Any comment there?
I'd also like to thank the staff and a number of volunteers who are involved in this committee and give up their free time, as well as managing a number of land care and host care groups. We couldn't do it without them. Hundreds of hours of volunteer work going to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Moore. And the Sport and Recreation Advisory Committee, any further data? Okay, are there any other reports? Alderman Moore.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll table the minutes of the last meeting of the Howard Community Centre, which was held the other day. There are two issues in those minutes which are ongoing issues. I virtually tabled them, the two issues there is the noise abatement issue in the men's shed, which has been discussed at this council for some time. There are the consultant's report has now been received and having been paid for, and it actually contains three elements. Two of those common components relate to inside the shed, and the men's shed will be proceeding with those, which should create some comfort. The third component, it will be a question of wait and see, because it involves a noise attenuation wall built on the fence that separates the men's shed from the bowling rink. So we're sort of hoping that although the noise being emitted is within acceptable standards, there is some hope that a 8 to 10 decibel reduction of the machinery will be capable by doing in-house, fairly extensive in-house modifications. The other issue, Mr Mayor, which has been of some ongoing concern, relates to the what was thought to be parking issues in the top car park at the Howard Community Centre. Now that issue actually wasn't so much parking, it was about parents dropping off their kids. Of course, parking's not the issue. Most of the people that are there at 3:30 in the afternoon have already got a parking. It's not that. It's the fact that they went into the car park and would just throw out little Johnny and little Jane into the oncoming traffic, to make their own way through the traffic. So it wasn't a question of that. Now that issue really does belong with the Education Department, although I think Council have suggested that perhaps we could arrange some sort of a drop-off zone in the lower car park with some safety. However, the committee was informed that although Council had written to the school on a second occasion suggesting further talks, that no reply had been received from the school, which is a little bit disappointing given some of the acrimony that surrounded this issue, concerned. So I guess it's to put on my record, I'll put on here the disappointment that the Education Department has chosen not to engage with Council over what is essentially their problem and a problem for their children attending that school.
If I could provide an update, late last week the General Manager and myself actually did meet with the Principal, the Parents and Friends Association and a representative from the Department of Education, and we've undertaken to work through the issues in a collaborative way.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, because it is in the end the problem, their problem, and the safety of the children that attend that school. And another element that came out was that although it's a public parking space, although it's a public car park, although it's a the spaces are allocated according to the uses there, it is after all a public car park. There's a public runway, and we can't really be writing to people, to ratepayers who paid for those car parks, saying you can't use them. So,
thank you. Are there any other reports? Alderman John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have supplied copies of the September Richmond Advisory Committee and the last Youth Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'd like to table the minutes of the Winterside Community Activity Centre last meeting, the 15th of October, which is the annual general meeting, and note that Mr Rob Billings, the chairman, has been returned for yet another term. And also, if I may, just quoting from the chairman's report, Mr Mayor, acknowledge that long-serving Treasurer Diane Ward has, after more than 20 years, has decided to step down from that position. She'll remain the library coordinator and will represent the library on the management committee, so all is not lost. We thank Diane for her 2 decades of service. And also Dale Morris, well known to many of us here, has retired as senior manager. I'm pleased to say that Angela Coots has started taking that role as admin officer, which is a former board member and well known to many of us here, which is great. But I'll table those two, the minutes in that annual and the chairman's report.
Thanks, Alderman Blomley. There being no other reports, we'll move on to item 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports for the 12th, 19th and 26th of October be noted. Alderman Warren.
May I ask some questions on this?
Absolutely, thank you.
There were, I refer to the weekly briefing report of the 12th of October, and I won't bore you by reading chapter and verse, but there were 2 notices of motion to remove trees on council land. And through you, Mayor, I'd just like to ask the General Manager if there is a plan to replace those trees with a more appropriate species once they're removed.
You're in a position to answer that.
Mr Graham may well be Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor, on the first one, which was at 3 Anitra Close, Gilston Bay, the report talks about the tree will be removed and not replanted. And on the second one, which was at 2/20 Mornington Road, it just talks about the tree is to be removed, but I can further follow up on these 2 items and advise the Alderman if there's options in terms of replanting.
Do you think it would be a good policy to plant additional trees if we're removing, especially ones that are of significant value like that as habitat? My second question is from the briefing report of the 19th of October, and I note that we were advised as Aldermen that the decision that we made 3 weeks ago to reject the proposal for a jetty from Dorrance Road has been appealed, and that you advised us that that appeal is now with the Resource Management Planning Appeals Tribunal. My question is, did you also advise or did Council also advise the people who made representations and deputations on that issue? Because I have concerns that we're trying to improve our communication, and I'm informed that when they contacted the Resource Management Appeals Tribunal, they were told just to read the paper every day and to keep ringing every day to see if an appeal had been lodged. And since we're able to be informed, I don't see why we can't extend that same courtesy to other parties who are interested in that matter.
Thank you. Mr Lovell.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I need to check that. I think that is our standard practice, so I'd be surprised if it hasn't been done, but if it hasn't, it's probably underway. And I'll confirm that in a follow-up.
Thank you.
Alderman James.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to the weekly briefing report of the 12th of the 19th of October 2020, and Anzac Park cliff top fence. I think it's great news that the fence has now been constructed, and it's obviously on the as a backdrop to the Anzac Memorial. So I think that it took 2 years.
And I presume there's a question here.
Yes, there is. Through you to Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, did it come under sort of in the ballpark of the cost that council approved in relation to the construction of the fence, or was there a contingency factor involved? Thank you.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll have to follow up on that one, but I believe it was within budget.
Yeah.
My second question is in relation to the 19th of October 2020, the development application for jetty adjacent properties at Orange Road. My question through you to Mr. Lovell. Mr. Lovell, can you advise us of the, presumably a planner and council's legal representative who will be defending council's decision of the 12th of October 2020?
General Manager will take that, I believe.
Thank you. I'll respond to that. Thank you for the question. Council will be represented by Andrew Walker in respect to that application.
And what about a planner?
I'm not sure whether that's within house or external.
My understanding is it's external, but I thought Mr. Lovell may be able to advise.
Excuse me. Through Mr. Mayor, yes, Evan Boardman's the planner.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions? Alderman Mulder, and then Alderman Blomley.
Just a point of clarification on the issue raised by Alderman Warren, and it's a very good issue. But the policy actually requires that there's a replacement of trees on public land policy. And there will be times, I suspect, where a tree, just simply replanting a tree at a particular spot, will achieve nothing but a problem down the track a little further. And I would think under those occasions, council ought to be finding a similar species tree and planting it in a nearby park where it isn't quite the nuisance that it is. So I think that is what the policy was intended to do. As I recall, some 10, 12 years ago, we thrashed it out.
Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I refer to the weekly briefing report of 19th of October, page 4, the Lincoln Street Lindisfarne pedestrian crossing. And can I just take this opportunity, Mr. Mayor, to thank council staff for this engagement with the community. There has been a question, people that have received this letter regarding flashing lights to illuminate a sign at the crossing there. You'll recall, Mr. Mayor, the motion that was passed by this council at a meeting on the 21st of October had there that we would investigate flashing lights and solar power as a potential solution. I recall the initial report we received from the consultants didn't look at that, and they had to go back to them for further advice. And the question's being asked: are flashing lights part of the solution? And if not, why not?
Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Mayor, the Pitt and Sherry report did consider options in terms of flashing lights and advised that a wombat crossing was recommended at this location, and that the crossing didn't warrant a higher level of attendance as needing flashing lights. Examples of those, for example, are in high-speed environments where you want to bring that attention to motorists travelling at a faster speed that you're approaching a pedestrian area, and the report didn't recommend at this location, so our design is proceeding as per that with a wombat crossing, which will effectively be a speed hump, and there will be signage, not flashing, indicating to motorists that they are approaching the pedestrian crossing. But as part of the works, we are improving the street lighting at that location to assist pedestrians at night walking across this area.
Okay. Any other questions from the weekly briefing reports? In that case, I have a motion to accept the officer's recommendation on all those items we've covered. Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Seconded, Alderman Kennedy. Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried. Against? The motion is carried. Moving back to item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate. Are there any declarations of interest for this meeting? Thank you. Item 7 is public question time. There are no matters on notice as such, but we have 3 questions without notice. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll, in the usual way, read the question out and then provide the answer. The first question is from Mrs. Joanne Marsh of Belrive. Mrs. Marsh asked the following. On the 31st of August, I fell on a concrete asphalt surface in Derwent Street. I had walked over many hundreds of times and believed to be flat. I lacerated my chin, damaged a tooth and smashed my shoulder, which required a total shoulder replacement to repair the damage. When recounting my story, I have heard about other people who have fallen in the Belrive area and sustained nasty injuries. Mrs. Marsh asked the following 2 questions. How are Council gathering and monitoring data about the nature and location of falls in public places in the City of Clarence that have resulted in significant injuries? What advice are the Council using to inform best practice in proactively maintaining surfaces to reduce the risk of pedestrian falls and to inform best practice in surface design for footpaths and boulevards? The answer to the question is Council has a network of over 450 kilometres of footpaths. An audit of our footpaths is conducted every 3 years. From this audit, a program of work is developed based on the condition rating from the audit and the likelihood of an accident. If Council receives a report of a footpath hazard outside the audit process, the area is inspected to assess the hazard and determine priority of intervention. Design of Council's footpaths and boulevards is undertaken in accordance with Australian standards and safety and design requirements, which requires Council to consider the potential risks involved in the life of a design and to ensure it is safe to build, use and maintain. The second question is from Mr. Victor Marsh of Belrive. Mr. Marsh says as follows. The tendering process for the variously named footpath and landscaping works in the western end of Belrive Beach Regional Park has been delayed from early 2022 until late 2020. My question is, during this time, what has happened to the $100,000 given to the Council in early 2019 by former Premier Will Hodgman for works in the park? I propose to take that question on notice. Mayor?
Thank you.
The third question is actually 3 questions. It's from Miss Jenny McLeod. The first question is, in relation to the South Arm Oval Master Plan, October 2020, what amount of funds from the $51,559 detailed in 7.1 of item 11.5.2, 12th of October 2020 Council meeting will be used to aid the Council officers in preparing detailed designs, plans and costings for the play space and engage a designer to prepare detailed engineering plans and a cost estimate for the skate park berm and fence? The answer to the question is no firm costs have been determined at this stage on the detailed design, plans and costings. Internal resources will be used for the berm and landscape design. External resources will be needed for the site survey and acoustic modelling and engineering details to assist with the final berm and paling fence. Question 2 is, once these 2 designs and costing projects are completed, what will be the remainder of the $51,559 to be used for? The answer is any remaining budget funds will be advised for Council to consider funding the next phase of the master plan implementation. The third question is, when and from what budget program will the following be built and installed? The play space and the skate park berm/fence. The answer to this question is no firm costs have been determined at this stage on the detailed design, plans and costings. Internal resources will be used for the berm and landscape design. External resources will be needed for the site survey, acoustic modelling and engineering details to assist with the final berm and paling fence. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And item 8, deputations by members of the public. General Manager again.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 3 deputations tonight. The first deputation is from Andrew McLean, Senior Town Planner of Axicom, in relation to the development application at 178 Delphus Drive for a telecommunications facility. Mr McLean says Axiom with Optus propose a new telecommunications facility at 178 Delphus Drive, Sandford. The facility will significantly improve 3G and 4G service in Sandford, Clifton Beach and Cremorne. This project responds to an established need. Many parts of the South Arm Peninsula have poor to non-existent mobile service. The proposed facility will rectify these problems. Modelling has been provided comparing existing and proposed coverage. No co-location options are available. There are 4 existing mobile base stations within 9 kilometres of this site. All were investigated at length, but none can effectively service the peninsula. The project will comply with Australian Government safety standards and will not pose a risk to community safety. The Australian Government advises that mobile technology has no long or short-term health effects. The Australian Government enforces a strict safety standard limiting the amount of EME, that's electromagnetic emission, produced by a base station. The Government advised that sites which operate at 100% of the limit are still considered safe. Maximum EME levels produced by the proposed facility will represent less than 1% of the levels allowed by the Australian safety standard. This facility will operate at a maximum EME level representing 0.77% of the standard. Visual and environmental impact has been minimised. To service this area, the site must be located in the vicinity of Mount Augustus on elevated land. Axicom, having endeavoured to reduce visual and environmental impacts as far as possible, photo montages have been provided to demonstrate visual impact. Clearing will be kept to the absolute minimum necessary for construction. We thank Council for hearing the application and trust these matters will be taken into account in the decision. The second deputation is from Mr David Turfrey in respect to the same development application at 178 Delphus Drive. My name is David Turfrey, and last year I built and moved into a new home in Rosehill Drive, and this sits within 500 metres of the proposed telecommunications tower. I'm strongly opposed to this tower, and many residents that I have spoken to in the vicinity of the tower are also concerned about this development. I entered into my opposition of this tower with the thought that the voice of the resident is often drowned out by big business, and upon reading the Council's recommendation that this development be recommended for approval, my fears have been confirmed. I find it to be contradictory that one performance criteria states that structures should not make significant impacts on the rural landscape due to the structure sitting on a ridgeline. The assessment is that this complies because due to operational necessities, the proposed structure height cannot be reduced. Therefore, it is exempt from the planning criteria because it is by its very nature a tall structure. So in effect, the report says that developers cannot build structures like this proposed tower unless it is a tower, then it can be built. You can't do something unless you have to do it, then it's okay. This kind of logic confuses me. On a personal level, I would like to ask councillors to put themselves in the position of the residents of the area, as fundamentally you were all elected on a promise to represent the people. Would you happily have you and your children submitted to untested electromagnetic radiation 24/7, year after year? Communication companies fund reports that tell us this is safe, but we were once told the same about cigarettes and asbestos. There are no long-term testing or reporting available, as this is a real-time experiment, and my 2- and 5-year-old children will now possibly be unwilling test subjects. Please consider this as a personal appeal rather than a business decision. I appreciate your time and consideration in this matter and trust that the wishes of residents over that of corporations will be respected. The third deputation is from Ms Susie Flanagan in respect to the development application at 228 Derwent Avenue, Lindisfarne for a food van. Thank you for taking the time out to consider our application. Times are very uncertain at the moment and COVID has made me think it's time to live life as much as we can and follow our dreams. Hence our proposal for a small mobile 2 by 3 metre approximately burger/ice cream van in the Lindisfarne precinct. We live in the ever-growing village of Lindisfarne and we feel that there is a huge demand for this type of service. I've been in the hospitality industry for 16 years and love people and food. I've done numerous jobs including international flight attendant for Qantas and nannying in New York, and now it is my time to do what I love. Our front yard is presentable and accessible for a small van as such, and we feel it would be fantastic, especially in summer for Lindisfarne. It wouldn't need to be a permanent fixture, and when not in use, it would be stored away. We would tastefully place it in the small area of our block and place green trees around it to blend it into the house. It would be a takeaway only service and have very low impact on the daily activities of the day-to-day village. We feel it would complement the area in a positive way. There is no food service of this type in the village and we counted approximately 1,000 staff here that need an option for lunch other than bakery food. We have 3 types of bakeries very close to each other. We wouldn't be open in the evening, so it wouldn't affect any residents, we feel. The parking wouldn't be an issue as people are parking to use the services here anyway. We have wonderful parks and waterways to enjoy our product and it would be a very low impact on the village and a very needed service. Our neighbours agree on both sides. We have been careful not to offer the same food as other outlets in the area and feel burgers are unique to the village. We have also chosen daytime only as not to impact the residents in the area. We have 2 beautiful children who we are trying to set a good example and work ethic too. Hopefully one day they will follow in our footsteps and follow their aspirations. We would love to be considered for this proposal and look forward to hearing the outcome. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, General Manager. Moving on to item 9.1, notice of motion, Alderman Warren. Do we have a second, please? Alderman Walker. Thank you.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to raise this motion a second time. I'd like to thank my colleagues who have taken the time to reflect and listen to our community. I'd also like to thank our Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Some of the words spoken at the debate just 3 weeks ago caused significant hurt and distress, but instead of responding with anger, you have come together to respond with beauty and we are all the richer for it. The sight of the lawns outside council chambers carpeted with Aboriginal flags bearing messages, some of hope and gratitude, others of frustration that we are even having this conversation, has been seen around the nation. I've had the opportunity to speak with many more members of the community, Indigenous and more recent arrivals. I realise how much I still have to learn. We are lucky in this country to have free speech, but with free speech comes great responsibility, and I urge my colleagues who may still have concerns about this motion to moderate their words to make sure you do not inflict further hurt and distress on our community. I was pleased to read an opinion piece in the Mercury last week that apparently none of the 6 aldermen who voted against this motion 3 weeks ago are against flying the Aboriginal flag. And yet, we are not flying the Aboriginal flag. I read that there is strong support for Clarence City Council to work towards reconciliation, and yet we are not flying the Aboriginal flag. And I've heard that some of you have been committed to reconciliation for some time, and yet we are still not flying the Aboriginal flag. The first step in reconciliation is to listen to our community and to show respect. If we are all agreed that we should fly the Aboriginal flag, then what is stopping us? Concerns have been raised in this chamber about when we should raise the flag, about the need to have a ceremony, about the desire to Aboriginal community. They are the concerns of people making decisions for the community instead of with the community. In the last 3 weeks, we have learned that there was a ceremony when the Aboriginal flag was raised for the first time in Clarence in the 1970s. How wonderful it would be to have the details of this event tended by First Nations man Cyril Brown in our council archives as part of our more recent history. There is no need to have another ceremony, though it's appropriate to work with our Tasmanian Aboriginal community to determine the most fitting way of marking our progress with a reconciliation action plan. But before that, let's raise the flag. Let our actions speak louder than our words. Let us say to our Tasmanian Aboriginal community, you are welcome in Clarence. Let the raising of the flag be the start of the reconciliation journey we take together.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I won't rehash the points Alderman Warren has so passionately outlined as reasons to support the motion, I will say that if you stuff up, fess up. All too often in sports, business, and indeed the political arena, people go to the nth degree to avoid owning up to errors. Not only does this incubate public cynicism, it can lead to paralysis and delay in addressing mistakes. This council got it wrong last meeting in a tie vote that I was on the wrong side of. And all those who that impacted on, I am sorry. The result could be described as a case of an overthinking and underthinking process at the same time. Multiple aldermen who didn't support the motion made mention of the reconciliation action plan that council has embarked on as the best vehicle for progressing this issue. It became a matter of process, not only overcomplicating a relatively straightforward motion and at best delaying an almost certain eventual outcome, but moreover not thinking about how the decision would be received, let alone how it might be portrayed. The day after the meetings, I reflected on the decision. The first words that came back to me were those of the Deputy Mayor, how she had discussed the prospective motion with various members of the Aboriginal communities and that it had been well received. How must hearing that result of the meeting have felt. Then I thought about the auxiliary flagpole outside Chambers, a relatively innocuous, inanimate object. But in light of the previous decision, an empty flagpole was highly likely to become a very prominent symbol in and of itself. That is why by lunchtime on the Wednesday, I had given the General Manager notice that I intended to move a very similar motion to what Alderman Warren had done only a day and a half before. By Thursday, Council's decision had become a live media issue receiving a lot of coverage. Not always accurate, but all as a consequence of the decision that was made, or I guess in the case of a tie vote, not made. The timing of last meeting's motion still gives capacity for us to revisit this matter tonight before Nadoc week. The alderman who voted in support of a similar motion last meeting did so in a fairly straightforward fashion, expressing their reasons as to why. I could understand for them it might be a little bit more complicated this time around, and I regret that this is the case, as I do any impact on council staff flowing from the previous decision. We can make consideration of this motion as simple or as complicated as we want to, but I do seek council support and support in an overwhelming majority.
Did you have an amendment to make?
I do, Mr Mayor. I seek leave of Alderman Warren and Alderman Walker to move an amendment which gives two additions to Alderman Warren's motion, and that is on the screen. Number 2, that Council fly the Torres Strait Islander flag for Nadoc Week and Reconciliation Week each year, and request the General Manager develop a flag policy for presentation to Council at an upcoming meeting.
Could I just ask Alderman Warren, are you happy to accept that?
Yes, I'm happy to accept those additions.
Is the seconder willing to accept it? That becomes a substantive motion as shown on the board. You're free to speak to it.
Thank you. When I actually did put these additions to all of the aldermen, it's important to note that I took the second one from the Reconciliation Australia information sheet which details that the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag should fly separately but together, and that where possible they should fly at all times. However, many councils and other levels of government actually fly the Torres Strait Islander flag at Nadoc Week and Reconciliation Week. It's my understanding that as a practice, we have actually flown the Torres Strait Islander flag at Nadoc Week, but not at Reconciliation Week. So this addition will actually formalise the flying of the flag for those 2 weeks. In relation to the third point, my request was actually that the General Manager develop a draft flag policy which would come to a workshop and then to a meeting. I guess the outcome is very much the same, but that policy needs to be considered before it comes to a council meeting. That flag policy would not relate purely and simply to the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag. It would relate to various flags and the correct protocols for flying those flags. Going back to the 1st of June 2015, which Alderman Warren referred to in her explanatory notes, Alderman Kay McFarlane and Alderman Deborah Thurley were supported unanimously to get 2 more flag poles, so that we now have 4 flag poles. In her explanatory notes, Alderman McFarlane made it clear that she believed that we needed to look at flying the national, state, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other international flags and local flags where appropriate. This third point is to actually ensure that we have a clear policy around the flying of flags. There are a number of councils within Australia who have this type of policy. In Tasmania, for example, Glenorchy City Council has such a policy, and another policy that I have noted that is very clear is the Randwick City Council policy. So I seek leave for these 2 additional points to be part of the motion.
Thanks, Alderman Bomberto. I'd like to hand the chair over to the Deputy Mayor and speak to this motion as well. And Madam Chair, it does give me great pleasure to support this motion, and I do want to thank Alderman Warren for her willingness to work through the issues that some of us faced at the last council meeting. It was highly unfortunate and clearly hurtful to many that the loss of the motion at our last council meeting was headlined as Clarence City Council refuses to fly the Aboriginal flag. It is a fact that we had previously committed to developing a reconciliation plan, and flying the flag would certainly have been part of that. The Aboriginal flag is an important symbol for all Aboriginal people in Australia. To me, it did seem to be a matter of fundamental courtesy and respect that we should consult with the Aboriginal community before permanently flying their flag. That said, I also understand the sentiment that we have a spare flagpole, put it up. Since the last council meeting, we have met with members of the local community who identify as Aboriginal, engaged with the Tasmanian Aboriginal leaders at the Reconciliation Collective Forum last week, met with Reconciliation Tasmania in a workshop here, and we've been briefed on national flag protocols. I was especially moved by the creative and poignant protest by members of our community, which involved planting hundreds of small Aboriginal flags on our front lawn. many with messages on the back. While now removed from the lawn, we have saved the flags with messages on them for posterity. We were reminded by Bill Lawson, Board Member of Reconciliation Australia and Co-Chair of Reconciliation Tasmania, that the pathway to reconciliation has many challenges. These will involve challenges within white communities, within black communities, as well as between white and black. We as a council have encountered some of those challenges already. To me, there are three excellent reasons to fly the Aboriginal flag permanently. Firstly, to recognise the Murma people of the Paradermi Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which our city is located. Secondly, to demonstrate to our existing Aboriginal people that we are welcoming and hospitable as a city and we respect their heritage and culture. And thirdly, to signal to the wider Clarence community that their council is committed to reconciliation. I also want to thank Alderman von Berto for her amendment to fly the Torres Strait Islander flag during both Nadoc and Reconciliation Weeks. Nadoc Week celebrations are held around the country to celebrate the history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The week is celebrated not just by Indigenous communities, but also in increasing number, government agencies, community organisations, local councils, workplaces, schools and sporting groups. Reconciliation Week is celebrated every year from the 27th of May to the 3rd of June. These dates represent two significant milestones in our country's reconciliation journey: the successful 1967 referendum and the 1992 High Court Mabo decision. The City of Clarence is the second largest by population in Tasmania, and we should participate fully in these national celebrations. To me personally, the reconciliation journey is fundamentally important if we are to overcome the inequality experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and achieve life outcomes which are equal for all Australians. Flying the Aboriginal flag will be a symbol of our commitment to that journey. There are, of course, as Alderman von Berto pointed out, protocols to follow. So I'm also pleased that the motion before us requests the GM prepare a formal flag policy to accommodate tonight's decisions. I commend the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Chen. Hand the chair back.
Thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. One of those poignant flags had the message, flying the flag is symbolic, so is not flying the flag. And as the Liaputa community has told us, that flying the flag is a recognition that the Indigenous community were here first and are still here. Governor Warner flies the flag to remind us of the injustices of the past, as does our Supreme Court. Every government school and nearly every other council flies the flag as a sign that Aboriginal people are welcome and not in a foreign place. If flying the flag has anything to do with reconciliations, it is a precursor. And reconciliation cannot begin without acknowledging past injustices and saying sorry. It is divisive, though, to hide behind an uncertain reconciliation action plan for not doing probably the only thing on which all Aboriginal communities agree, flying the flag. Mr Mayor, that was an embarrassing week, with all the posturing, evolving excuses. We haven't consulted, we need a workshop, we need a reconciliation plan, we need a ceremony. And I was not alone in my embarrassment. A national journalist has said, and I quote, "Tony, I'll be honest with you, the story is so embarrassing, I don't want to cover it anymore. It would be hurtful to Aboriginal people, and I reckon you'll stagger to the correct decision in the end." Mr Mayor, that's the reason the issue faded. Even the right-wing press were too embarrassed to cover it. The opponents who are about to backflip should have all come to the point that I read more into it than was there. Just say oops, as Alderman Walker's done. I got it wrong. Don't pretend you never argued that the RAP process was some sort of a showstopper. No excuses like, oh, I now support flying the flag because it won't be on the fourth flagpole. I support flying the flag because we will also fly the Torres Strait Island in Nadoc week. Or worse still, I can't support flying the Aboriginal flag because the Torres Strait flag will displace the council flag. Jeez, just swallow your pride, say I got it wrong. I read too much into this simple gesture and I support flying the flag because it's the right thing to do. As a site of the first white settlement in Tasmania and the first violent encounter with the First Peoples, Clarence should be the first council to fly this flag, not the last. The first to say sorry, not the last. And to call the issue divisive is perverse. Divisive politics is making excuses for not doing the right thing. Divisive politics is reading into this simple gesture complications that are not there. Divisive politics is expecting the Aboriginal communities to speak with one voice, a situation that has eluded every other race on earth, as if we Caucasians hadn't inflicted 1,000 years of intra-racial warfare and 2 world wars on the planet. It was we who dispossessed the Aboriginals of their land and shattered their culture. Divisive politics is grandiloquent opinion pieces that are wrong, hurtful and take cheap shots at aldermen who have a different view of the world. Divisive politics is having a ceremony like handing Risdon Cove to the Tasmanian Aboriginal Land Council. Who gets invited, who raises the flag, who gets to speak. That just reignites the division between the Aboriginal communities. Flying the flag is a simple, non-controversial gesture. All Alderman Warren proposed was that the flag remain flying after Nadoc week. No fanfare, no controversy, no destructive divisions. This is so very simple. Just do it. Mr Mayor, flying the flag is symbolic. So is not flying the flag.
Alderman Kennedy.
Well, here we are again, and it's a bit of an understatement to say that I was very surprised and disappointed that this was only supported by 6 of us the last time the motion was before us. And like Alderman Mulder, I was also very embarrassed. The motion has been amended now, so I think those that got it to a point where it would appear that a few more around the table are more comfortable now with where we're at. And I thank you, Alderman Walker, for your honesty. Very refreshing. But let's not forget that this has caused a lot of angst in our community and beyond, and all unnecessary. And there's been plenty of public backpedaling, which is not a good look for us. I hope we're finally starting to listen to our community, and this is not just a reaction to the backlash when Alderman Warren's original motion was only supported by the 6 of us. How often do we hear in these chambers when we're talking about big developments, let's just get on with it? Or let's just get on with this and show this motion the respect it deserves.
Other speakers? Alderman Evans.
Thank you. Flying the Aboriginal flag is a simple, respectful acknowledgement on the land of which we live. I supported the original motion. I'm in support again tonight. 3 weeks ago, there was no real indication that such a straightforward, uncomplicated motion was going to be shot down. No amendments foreshadowed, nothing much said in the lead-up, in some cases nothing said on the night. It's impossible to argue that the council emerged from that debate with its reputation enhanced. Some may argue it's barely intact. That vote was a peek behind the curtain of how we operate. I don't think many people like what they saw. We stuffed it up. We squibbed it. We wrung our hands. We refused to take responsibility. So what's changed? Well, I think in the case of what we heard in the seconder of the motion, there has been 3 weeks of genuine reflection. But for white Australians, we walk into this big, horrible grey building and take for granted that we're welcome. You know, we stand for the welcome to country as a sign of respect, but maybe we don't always reflect on what it means. I received a bit of feedback from a school principal a few weeks ago which helped explain it to me. He said that an Aboriginal parent at his school had told him that when she saw the flag flying at the school, it made her feel safe and welcomed. I can only imagine what an empty flagpole is saying. I can only imagine what the words on the plaque out the front are saying. What has the past 3 weeks said? I'm looking forward to the Reconciliation Action Plan process as a pathway to healing reconciliation and growth. However, flying the flag is totally separate to that process. We shouldn't use one to muddy the waters of the other. It's not up to anyone else to tell us to fly the flag, it's up to us. The ball is in our court. Tonight, I respect the vote of those who spent those 3 weeks reflecting on the previous decision, put their hand up and say that a mistake was made. That's growth, that's leadership. Any other chicanery is barely worth listening to. I don't really support or see the need for the amendments tonight. They feel a bit to me like someone walking out of their house who can't find their keys. What can I latch onto? What's my excuse? However, I'll still vote in support of it if it means the broader intent of the motion, which is as simple as respectfully flying the flag, is achieved. Unlike some, I'm not squibbing this vote because of a few words I might not like. Attitudes have changed, and it's up to us to reflect that. I'm glad that we are belatedly going to. I'm really sorry for what's transpired in the past few weeks, and frankly, well before that. I'm looking forward to a time that these simple things aren't controversial. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've listened very carefully to what's been said tonight, and I understand that there has been a change in relation to some of the members around the circle have reconsidered and made their comments accordingly. But I would like to refer council to the motion that was passed, and on page 12 of the 12th of October, the motion was put and lost, and the motion was lost. Now, that's a decision, as I understand it, that has been made by the council, and as a result of that, the flag didn't go up, or it wasn't in the process of going up at the end of Nadoc week on the 8th to 15th of November. At that meeting, I made the comment quite clearly that I was in support of the Aboriginal flag flying, but not at all times. Not at all times. Because if it's going to be flown at all times, it's basically going to not make it possible for other organisations to be able to raise their flag and be part and parcel of the City of Clarence. It's my understanding that the Aboriginal flag is a private flag, and the owner's concerns about where and when the flag is flown depends on what that particular commercial enterprise is about. And I think the example of where the request by the AFL to fly the flag was not agreed to by the owner because it was operating as a commercial enterprise. What I've been concerned about is that the motion for consideration in this particular instance, and also at the 12th of October, was that it would be on an ongoing basis, at all times is another word that was used, which would preclude other organisations, including charitable, marking the United Nations Day, international representatives, scouting and Girl Guide key events by raising their flags on their special occasions during the year. That means, does it not, that if we adopt the motion tonight, then that means, as I understand it, and that's basically what's going to has been introduced as part of the amendment, is that the council flag will be lowered, and in this particular instance, the debate is that the council flag would be lowered and the Torres Strait Islander flag would be raised for that Nadoc week, etc. So that really means that council is not going to have its flag flying as part of the the promotion of Clarence to all its citizens and everybody else for that matter. In particular, our sister city Akeshi and Council's cooperation student exchange programs have been very successful over the years, and their flag, I believe, should have been raised, and I don't believe it has been raised for the duration of their visit to our city. In this particular case, the council's flag would have to be lowered if we decided in this new policy that's being proposed that the council flag would be lowered and that other flags other than the council flag would be raised on that occasion. Flying the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag on occasions and developing a council policy has merit. However, it's my understanding that the council flag be lowered and the Torres Strait flag be raised to mark the occasion. It seems to me Clarence loses its relevance without a flag. In summary, I support the Aboriginal flag flying for most occasions, but not on an ongoing basis. I believe it's going to make our community more separate and not in the spirit of having the council flag flying, and that there is no sort of reconciliation that I see would be appropriate in this particular case. As I said on the 12th of October in this place, if the words "at all times" had been removed or had been deleted, and therefore the Aboriginal flag could be flown at different intervals at other times. But when there is a visiting delegation, then I believe that flag ought to be lowered. I will not support the motion.
I just have a point of order, Mr Mayor. The point of order, Mr Mayor, is that the previous contribution has stated, has incorrectly tried to mislead this council by equating the Aboriginal flag with an organisational flag. The Aboriginal flag is indeed a national flag, and it is a gazetted national flag, unlike all the other flags that Alderman James keeps to rely on. It is not just another organisation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, I supported this motion 3 weeks ago and I will support it again tonight. And now, as then, the reason is because members of the community have said to me that this is very important to them, that it shows that they are welcome in this place, and I think it's very important that we make everyone in our community welcome in this place.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think some other people here have pointed out that the flying the flag was not really the issue in the last debate. It was the process around getting it to that point. And I think while some people have made comment that it wasn't good to wait for 3 weeks, but I think the fact that we've come up with a couple of amendments, even from the motion that Alderman Warren put through last week, in the last couple of days, shows that this sort of reconciliation process is a living thing that changes from day to day and from week to week at times, and I suppose to get it right, is something that's really important, and it's a two-way thing. So while it would have been easy to do it at the time, at the time when I voted against it, I did take that into account that we were going through a reconciliation action plan. I thought it would have been appropriate to wait for that time. When you've got 12 white people sitting around a room making decisions without having the opportunity to have some input from other people, the Aboriginal community that might be affected, I thought that's probably not appropriate. And I mean, look, this might get me into a bit of strife as well, but I mean, I think in relation to, the flag, wouldn't it be wonderful in a few years' time whether we can actually have the one flag that we can all stand under and be proud to do so, rather than which can be a bit divisive in relation to the two. But being a Republican, I mean, I'd be more than happy to see the Union Jack go, and the Aboriginal components of the Aboriginal flag come in on the flag as well. But that's all part of it. And I do just want to reinforce my concern that sometimes, while these symbolic gestures are really important, and I certainly acknowledge that they're a part of the reconciliation process and acknowledgement process, I just hope that as a society, and I mean these issues are more at state and federal level, but that we do actually take some real action to close the gap between the Aboriginal community and the rest of the rest of the Australian community in relation to the education, the domestic violence, the substance abuse, and some of those things that are a concern in Aboriginal communities. I just, I think sometimes symbolic is great, but I just want to make sure that we keep focused on the other stuff. And the other part of it is that, the one thing is that we've got to try and take the name calling and the divisiveness out of the debate as well. And I mean, I certainly had some, things thrown at me in the last couple of weeks, and people interpret actions and intent and meaning in certain ways, and I don't think that helps at all either. So I'd encourage everyone involved in this, within this chamber, and certainly within the community, to give everyone the chance to explain their position. It may or may not be right, and these things change over time. So I'd encourage all of us to, certainly get behind this motion tonight, move forward with the reconciliation action plan, but let's do it in a positive way where we can actually have that two-way conversation, which I think is really important to coming up with something that everyone's really comfortable with, rather than just having the blunt stick approach where it's do as I say, and I don't think that's going to work for anyone. But I encourage everyone to support this motion tonight.
Thank you. Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, over the past 3 weeks, a cloud has needlessly hung over this council and indeed our whole community. We have seen political discourse descend into new depths, and sadly, this has done absolutely nothing to positively progress reconciliation in our community or close the gap for Tasmanian Aboriginal people in the key areas of health and education. Colleagues are well aware of the reasons why I was unable to support the motion at our last meeting. In short, it was a flawed motion. I'll note that even this evening, some 3 weeks after that initial motion, that the motion before us now has required amending during debate here on the floor of this chamber. However, as so aptly put by the CEO of Reconciliation Australia, Ms Karen Mundine, reconciliation isn't a single moment or place in time. It's lots of small, consistent steps, some big strides, and sometimes unfortunate backward steps. So, with those sage words firmly front of mind, it is important to note, Mr Mayor, that all elected members, each and every single alderman in this chamber this evening, is in favour of proudly flying the Aboriginal flag outside our council chambers. In our deliberations and workshops, our comprehensive engagement with Reconciliation Tasmania and the wider non-Indigenous Clarence community, as well as, Mr Mayor, our decision earlier this year to fund the Reconciliation Action Plan in this extraordinarily frugal financial year, I've been so very impressed with the collegiality and desire to attain a well-defined, holistic and lasting approach to Indigenous reconciliation in our city. So, Mr Mayor, whilst we have experienced an unfortunate backward step in this process, it is my sincere hope that we can now all proudly march forward together, shoulder to shoulder, as one united community. Mr Mayor, with Alderman Bomberto's amendment, I am pleased to support the motion.
Thank you. Alderman Warren, right of reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, I would like to thank those of my colleagues who've taken the time to reflect, and I would particularly like to thank the community who have come together on this, and we have had some really positive experiences in the last few weeks despite the trauma, and it has been a joy to see how the community responded to this, how the wider community came to visit the flags, and what a terrific symbol that was. I'll just address a couple of points quickly. The Aboriginal flag is not a private flag. That's incorrect, and we've pointed that out more than once. I'm concerned that Alderman James thinks that the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides, worthy as they are equivalent to the flag that represents people who have been here over 40,000 years. And again, I point out that the motion was lost, but that does not constitute a decision. I did offer at our briefing on Friday to move a rescindment for our agreement to do nothing, but I wasn't quite sure how to go about that, so we'll just move on from there. I also took the opportunity today to re-listen to the debate from 3 weeks ago, and there were some pertinent points in there, like a concern that the RAP not be derailed through an empty symbolic gesture like flying the flag, and that it was an easy and tokenistic approach to flying the flag. So, look, I'm still perplexed by how some of my colleagues think that it seems to be an issue of timing and that we should have done this as part of the Reconciliation Action Plan, so that it was all nicely tied up with a bow and a ceremonial cutting of the reconciliation cake. I see these as two very different parts of the same process, As I said 3 weeks ago, flying the flag is a simple gesture of respect that we can take right now. My understanding of the RAP is that it's going to be a much harder, longer process as we seek to overcome some deeply ingrained prejudices and misconceptions and work with the community to determine how we should proceed. But the community has already told us loud and clear how to proceed on the issue of flying the flag. Just do it. There's nothing to discuss or resolve. It couldn't be simpler. If you believe that we should acknowledge the original inhabitants and traditional custodians of this land, then you should support this motion. If you believe that it's disrespectful to only fly the flag on so-called special occasions and then take it down afterwards, leaving the flagpole empty, then you should support this motion. If you think this is an important first step towards engaging with our Tasmanian Aboriginal community prior to asking for their support as we work towards reconciliation, then you should support this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. So the motion is, as depicted on the screen, that we support flying the Aboriginal flag from beyond Nadoc Week. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is determination of petitions. 11.2.1 is a petition for planning application in regard to the jetty at Ruffs Bay. If I could have someone move that the recommendation, which is that we note the intent of the petition and advise the petitioners. Alderman Moller.
So move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Second, Alderman Bonberto. We no need to discuss that. Alderman Moller.
I'll just simply make the point that the people have spoken, Mr Mayor.
So all those in favour? Against? I think that's unanimous. Thank you.
That's all.
11.2.2 is a petition in regard to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel and Hospitality School that we, the petitioners want to us to buy it back, and that the recommendation is that we notify them of the decision last week. Alderman Mulder.
So move, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
I'd like to
Alderman
second
James.
it and also speak to the motion.
Sure. Alderman Mulder.
Yes, indeed, yes. Seconder. Seconder.
Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, the people have spoken.
Alderman James.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I just seek a response from the General Manager in relation to what he intends to advise the petitioners about. Is it, Mr Nelson, appropriate to advise the petitioners that the Council did not support an extension of time for the for substantial commencement of the Kangaroo Bay Hotel and Hospitality School development, and also that the Council may consider a buyback of the land from Shambroad Petrochemicals? Would that be sort of along those lines that you would be advising the petitioners in relation to this particular matter, please?
Through you, Mayor, thank you for the question. My advice will be to provide the words that appear in the minutes of the meeting, yes, and nothing more.
And nothing to do with, well, just on that, Mr Mayor, in the actual 2.1, it says Council, the petition contained X number of people and requesting Council to activate the buyback clause. Now, surely there is some response in relation to that, through you, Mr Mayor.
Well, the only thing that can be reported is the decision that Council did or did not make. It would be presumptuous to the GM to say that he expected Council to do this or that.
Oh, may not expected.
Sorry, I can't imply a decision or, in fact, a future decision, Alderman James.
Okay, anybody else wish to speak to this motion? Right, a reply, Alderman Moller.
Simply, Mr Mayor, that when we take a petition, we note the petition. That's all we're doing. And the petitioners did not request us to extend or not extend the clause. The petition actually relates to a future decision that council has yet to make, and that decision is the buyback. So the petition relates to whether or not we're going to buy it back. The people have spoken, we've noted their request, and no doubt we will factor that into our deliberations when that particular question comes before us.
Of course. So the recommendation as is, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. That now brings us to planning matters, and I advise that Council now intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. The first item there is 11.3.1, which is a development application at 11 North Terrace and 89A South Terrace, Lauderdale for 12 o'clock. Thank you, Alderman Ewington. Seconded, Alderman Blomley. Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think this is a certainly a badly needed piece of infrastructure down in the Lauderdale area. Having been someone that's used that toilet block or the old toilet block quite a bit over the last few years, I can certainly guarantee that it needs a little bit of work. It certainly needs to be tidied up. I mean, a couple of points I want to make on this is that, the ideal situation, down the track, I'd certainly love to see a little bit more than just a toilet block on this location, some form of showers and change rooms, to improve the amenity for the whole community in that space, which is something that Sport and Recreation Advisory Committee have looked at and are looking at trying to find a way forward with looking at this in all beachside areas so that we can actually develop a standard in relation to what we have, for people that are paddling, people that are swimming, people that are, for young families, certainly disability access and all those sort of things. But I certainly think that if we were to delay this project while we're working through that, the concept and bring all those sort of things online, we'd have a pretty ordinary toilet block waiting for a few more years. But I certainly think this would be certainly well in need, and I encourage my fellow aldermen to support this one. But one other thing I'd like to make is I find it weird that we have to actually ask for a planning permit to do something like this on our own land. And I'd like to see some way where we can look at this as part of our submissions to the Planning Commission and say, well, if it's an existing use and even if it's moved slightly, I just think that's one layer of regulation we can take out of our officers' workload and our workload to make it all move a little bit quicker. But I certainly think this will help, and I encourage everyone to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's not a great deal more I can add, except to say that, like Alderman Ewington, I was delighted to see this one come before us. In fact, that hopefully tonight we'll get the big tick and it'll go ahead. I note that there is an external shower as part of this block, and my concern was really, well, is it large enough? If I sort of, looking at the area there and the demand, particularly days like today, for example, I'd submit that there might be demand for a bigger facilities there. Having said that, it's great to see that this is going in, and as we all know, that part of our city is growing at a rate of knots. So, with those few words, happy to support.
Other speakers? I guess there's no need for a right reply.
No.
Put the motion as recommending approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I'll take this opportunity of welcoming Alderman Pearce to the company. 11.3.2 is a Section 43A amendment application. It's been out for public comment. The recommendation is that we don't see any need to warrant modifications, and that we advise the Planning Commission accordingly. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Chong. Second to Alderman Ewington. Would you like to speak to it?
Support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers, Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question through you to Mr Graham in his capacity as manager. Mr Graham, in paragraph 2 on page 54, it says, and I quote, "The proposal also involves the adjoining council reserve at 10 Thurma Street for the establishment of a new stormwater infrastructure." Mr Graham, am I correct in that the developer, once it goes through this process under the appropriate Section 43A proposal, will the developer be responsible for the construction and payment obviously for the new stormwater infrastructure? And given it's on council land, is it possible that there may be some, not claim, but some proposal down the track for that to be, some of the costs for that on council land to be recouped by the developer?
Through Mr Mayor, I'm not too sure exactly on that at the moment, and I will have to look further into it in terms of the actual stormwater infrastructure.
Sorry. Mr. Graham, a bit away. What we're discussing, if I can just clarify, it involves stormwater works on the council property, and they'll be constructed at the developer's cost. And when they're completed, they'll be handed over as council property. This is a typical scenario in subdivisions when stormwater works or other works, infrastructure, roads, all those sorts of things are constructed. When they're constructed to the council's satisfaction in accordance with standards and plans, then they're taken over by the council. And we would foresee no short or medium term implications for the council.
Other speakers? Robert reply? Put the motion, which is, as I mentioned before, that we don't warrant any modifications and revise the TPC accordingly. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.3 is a development application, 178 Belfast Drive, Sanford, for a telecommunications facility. Do we have a seconder, please? Alderman Newington, thank you. Seconder. Alderman Mulder, thank you. Alderman Newington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, after looking at the coverage maps of mobile communications in the South Arm, Clifton, Lauderdale, Sanford areas, it's quite obvious that there's a significant gap in coverage in some of those communities. We all know how big a part of our lives that the mobile communications plays. From safety issues, education, keeping in touch with your loved ones, letting everyone know what's going on. It's a really important part of how we live these days. Now, we've obviously received a few submissions from local residents that they have every right to put their hand up and say, I'd prefer not to have this there, and I can understand some people who might feel that way. But every day we make decisions where we actually do things that might impact on other people's amenity in their own home. And if we never made a decision because we were concerned about impacting on other people in some way, cities really wouldn't progress too far, or towns or that sort of thing. But I think in this case, the public benefit that comes from providing improved communications infrastructure and coverage for people, the safety implications, and the fact that it's such a big part of modern life means that I think the proponents have looked at all the options in relation to where they could possibly put this one, and this seems to be the only place where it'll work. Hopefully, the people that are impacted by it, they've quoted, a few people have quoted some of the research and those sort of things, saying that the jury's saying that the research says that it's dangerous, whereas all the information that we've seen and what I've read over the years seems to suggest that there's no evidence that this is as dangerous as some people assume. And hopefully, over time, that'll be the case anyway. But I certainly think this, the positives outweigh the negatives for this part of the community. And hopefully, my fellow aldermen support this one, because it is, an important part of infrastructure, for people in, a big part of our city. Thank you.
Alderman Mulder.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I do note the representations and I do note the concerns. The fact is that this isn't a unique one-off tower located within those sorts of distances, and certainly the medical, the science, and I would be hesitant to agree that it's science manufactured by big developers, as has been suggested in the deputation. It is in fact independent science and independent things. Now, it doesn't mean that science always gets it right, and there are examples where science has got it terribly wrong. You know, we only think about horrible things like thalidomide and asbestosis, for example. You know, so those sorts of things we gradually get through. I mean, you're right, smoking, which was a case of big business interfering with the things, but that was big business medical research, not independent medical research. And every day we're awash with radio waves all the time. You know, our phones can tell us where we are or where we want to go, and it's all because, you know, there's at least 12 satellites at any given time bombarding us with signals. So the fact is that that's there, that's modern life, and we sort of need to do it. Now, I do sympathise with them, and I can empathise with them. And if they intend to proceed with an appeal, I would certainly urge them to get some independent planning advice before heading down that path. So, Mr Mayor, they are a fact of life, and unfortunately, if you live near the top of a hill, one of the things you're likely to get is a radio tower not too far from you.
Thank you. Other speakers, Alderman Jones?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's interesting to hear the other speakers in relation to this, because it is contrary to Council's planning scheme, and on page 77 the proposal is discretionary because it does not meet the acceptable solutions under the scheme and is a discretionary land use under the rural resource zone. Now, that's really important here because we're dealing with the zone, rural resource zone. So if we go over to page 79, the rural resource zone, and that is in relation to building height. And one of the representatives this evening made their representation referred to this very matter. The maximum height of the proposal is 40 metres. Now, we've got to read into the performance criteria here to establish as to whether or not the performance criteria basically doesn't apply in relation to the acceptable solution. That's how we go through these processes. Now, clause 26.4.1 P1, building height must satisfy all of the following, A, B and C. Now, before we go into A and B, let's have a look at C. The performance criteria C, if for a non-residential use, the height is necessary for that use. What does the comments from the planner say? The proposed structure is a telecommunications tower, and therefore the height is necessary for operational purposes. So the reason why they're saying this is, it's not an issue as far as height's concerned, it's because the height is necessary for operational purposes. It may be for operational purposes, but we've got to deal with the planning scheme here, and therefore it is not, according to the planning scheme, it is not meeting that particular performance criteria. If we go back to A and B, it has to be the building height must be consistent with any desired future character statements provided for the area. And the planner's comment here is it complies. Why does it comply? It is noted that there is no desired future statement in relation to this. So, if there's no future statement in relation to it, therefore it should be consistent with any particular character of that particular area, and that is, it should be excluded as part of the approval process in relation to clause 26.4.1P1. Now if we go to part B, be sufficient to prevent unreasonable adverse impacts on residential amenity on adjoining lots by overlooking a loss of privacy. We've heard from a representative that he is within 500 metres of this tower, and therefore the whole question as to whether it's going to cause unreasonable, adverse impacts on a residential amenity, look, it basically covers this in a nutshell by making this proposed structure is a non-habitable structure, and therefore it's considered will not cause any unreasonable adverse impacts on residential amenity. Because it's a non-habitable thing, therefore it doesn't cause any unreasonable impact on the nearby residences. Rural resource zone is really an important part of this process. It is extremely important, and therefore, in my opinion, the performance criteria and the assessment by the actual officers has been not appropriate, does not satisfy the building height, and I will not be supporting this recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman James. Other speakers? Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I listened to the deputation, and the representative asked us to put ourselves in his position. Would we like a tower 500 metres from our property? And the answer is no. I would not like a tower 500 metres from my property. Look, the science is, to the best of our knowledge at the moment, who knows what might change over the next few years. The only thing that gives me comfort on this is that this is a tower. If the technology improves in the next few years, we can take it down. It's not, dare I say, like a Kangaroo Bay hotel that would be really hard to remove. So I'm torn as to which way to go on this, but I think on balance, the number of people in the area who would like improved reception is a significant point at this stage, and I do feel for the people who are going to have this in their backyard, basically.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, yes, I'd like to thank Mr Turvey for his deputation, and I, like Alderman Warren and James, really actually feel for those people that there are 9 representations, and as we know, it's rural space, and I certainly wouldn't be happy myself if I bought my piece of land there and all of a sudden a tower's going to be put in. But I understand the modern world we're living in now. I do, because of the nature of some of my friends in the surfing community. I know how bad the reception can be in those areas, which can also be a safety issue as well. Unless you sign up with another provider, I guess. But yeah, I really feel for those people that have made representations, but on this case I am going to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James? Sorry, Alderman Walker.
Apology accepted, Your Worship.
Alderman James has already spoken.
Look, I didn't campaign to get re-elected on a promise of more phone towers on ridgelines. And I have spoken to some of the representatives in this area a few weeks ago, and it'll be a material change as far as they're concerned with their aspect. And some indeed have raised concern around electromagnetic radiation, which, whilst the evidence to date that we have is not of concern, I don't dismiss it. It's a legitimate fear. I wouldn't be building my house under a high tension power line, for example. But it comes down to this, the shackles of sitting as a planning authority and weighing things up and taking it on board. So I will be supporting the motion, and I'll also make the following point. As planning matters come before us, we either deal with them as we see, or the leader to them, fellow aldermen who give due consideration to alternates and circulate them. And however much you might profess to rally against something and strongly disapprove it, you don't do the courtesy of actually putting the work in and suggesting an alternative. You do lay yourself open to the allegations of performative deliberation. Had an alternative been done, I would have given it due and unbiased thought and worked it through, but none was forthcoming. So I will be supporting this motion, even though it does cause some discomfort and understandably so to many that live nearby.
Other speakers? In that case, Alderman Urigan. Oh, sorry, Alderman Pearce.
So, thank you, Mayor. Look, same sort of thinking as Alderman Walker. I did not like it. I looked at the area and I thought, geez, I do not like this at all. But as Alderman Walker said, I mean, there's communication problems there, and I cannot see why we wouldn't approve it. If I lived there, like Alderman Kennedy said, I wouldn't like it near me, and I really don't like supporting it. But when I read, the officer's recommendation, I know Alderman James has raised some points, but most of it doesn't comply with various things in the report. So, in that sense, look, it will receive my support, but reluctantly, Mayor.
Thank you. Right, a reply, Alderman Ewing? No. Put the motion which is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 11.3.4 is a development application at 3 of 32 Bridge Street with access over 32 Bridge Street for visitor accommodation. Thanks, Alderman Bromley. Do I have a second to Alderman Chong? Thank you. Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Fairly straightforward. I'd like to thank the officers for this succinct report. Talking to some business owners in the area, there hasn't been any opposition to this at all. I think it's a smart use of the building, and of course adds increases our accommodation offering in our historic township of Richmond. So I think this is a fantastic outcome, and one that I'm very happy to support.
Thank you. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Visitor accommodation is surprisingly quite often in somewhat scarce supply in Richmond. I think this is a really neat use of a shop which is tucked out of the way and not very good as a shop, but will be great visitor accommodation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Any need for a right reply there, Alderman Bromley? I'll put the motion which is approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.5 is a development application at 228 Derwent Avenue, Dinsfarne, for a food van.
Move the recommendation.
Alderman James, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thanks, Alderman Mulder.
Again, we are in the process of addressing a food van policy, but of course this is a different proposal from what's being intended. And even though the representative has made some really important points, the fact of the matter is we do have a planning scheme, and I have advocated that on a number of occasions that we need to really keep to the planning scheme or stick to it in order to be able to address these issues. Now, it doesn't comply with the zone purpose statement in the general residential zone, and the proposal does not comply with clause E6P, E6P, 61P1A of the Clarence Interim Planning Scheme. Again, it's a Clarence Planning Scheme matter, and that proposal does not provide adequate on-site car parking, which, as we all know, is an important factor in any of these proposals where it has to meet certain guidelines and policy in relation to off-street parking. So, unfortunately, it doesn't meet those criteria, and notwithstanding, there has been a number of people, I believe, supportive of this. I see council support.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is one of those situations where I think that although a good case can be put for why one extra food van in this area wouldn't be such a harmful thing. I think being on Derwent Avenue, being on a busy, what is basically a semi-arterial road that services a lot of traffic through that area, being directly opposite a commercial precinct already, and what sort of would be if we were to approve this one because we admire the entrepreneurship of the people who did it, then can we expect a food van out of every in front of every second house on every road in the municipality, because the same case could be made for them. Look, I admire the entrepreneurship. The fact is that we have a planning scheme which is designed to try to keep residential use and amenity in residential zones and commercial use and in commercial zones, and this one is an attempt to import one zone into the other, and it is not a mixed-use zone. So I think it's a lay down misere that this one shouldn't proceed.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman
Yeah, for someone who finds it very difficult to knock back any application for someone having a go at building or business or whatever, I have to stand up here and acknowledge that this one is an example of where, look, the chances of it impacting on the local residents and the local shops is obviously there, and you know, I think we've all got to acknowledge that. Now, I give them a tick for having a go, and I'd encourage them to look at other alternatives for using the ban. But I think, you know, the risks associated with you know, opening this up and people setting up food vans, it's the way they do it in Asia, where every house has got a shop out the front of it. But I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily the way that we want to go this way. I mean, if they want to run a shop, you know, they need to get a shop front door that way. If they want to do a food van, hopefully with our new food van policy, we'll be giving people like these guys and everyone else out there that's got a food van or wants to get one an opportunity to get out there and fill those gaps in the community where, you know, it's a much better location to put food vans. It's going to draw people into our parks and recreation areas and our coastal trail, and I think that's a far better approach for us to be looking at moving forward. But yeah, I'm a bit reluctant to say that I'm going to support the motion to say no, but I think overwhelmingly it's something that you know, we do have to set some boundaries, and unfortunately I think this one's just a stretch too far.
Other speakers? Reply, Alderman Jones?
No, please.
So the motion is the officer's recommendation for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. That concludes our business of the Planning Authority, which takes us through to Alderman's question time. 2 questions on notice from Alderman Edmonds. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Alderman Edmonds provided 2 questions on notice. In the usual way, I'll read the question and then provide an answer. In respect to the first question, relates to the removal of artwork on a Taswater reservoir. The question is, can Council, as an owner of Taswater or Taswater, advise the reasons for removal of artwork and murals on the water reservoir on the corner of Ormond Street and Waverley Street, Belreeve? I can advise that Taswater is undertaking a major renovation of the water reservoir at Waverley Street. The renovation will ensure that the reservoir is fit for purpose for the next 20 years or more. Unfortunately, that will mean that the murals will be painted over. However, Taswater has advised me that the project includes funds to allow for replacement of those murals, which will be done in concert with local community groups. The second question relates to the flying of the Aboriginal flag, and this is a question directed to you, Mayor.
Thank you.
The question reads, Mayor Doug Chipman told the ABC on October 24th, 2020 that the Aboriginal flag will permanently fly at the Council chambers. Given the Council's decision, agenda item 9.2 on October 12, 2020, to not fly the flag permanently, how can Council officers enact that arbitrary announcement?
Yes.
Mayor.
Thank you, General Manager, and thank you, Alderman Edmonds, for the question. Firstly, and as pointed out by Alderman Warren tonight, Council did not make a decision not to fly the flag. Indeed, it was clear that Council did intend to fly the flag eventually as part of the Reconciliation Action Plan. The motion at our last meeting was lost for several reasons, none of which, in my view, detracted from Council's basic intention. It was also evident from the anger and hurt in the community that Council's full intentions needed to be explained. The use of the word will expressed those intentions and could not have been perceived by the Council officers to be an instruction. Thank you.
Will that be in writing, Mr Mayor?
Absolutely, be in the minutes. Moving on to, there's nothing at item 2.2. Item 12.2. Item 12.3, I propose that those answers provided are taken as read, which takes us through to 12.4, questions without notice. Could I start with Alderman Warren, please?
Mr Mayor, just before you completely leave questions on notice, there was a question that I asked at the last council meeting, which was taken on notice, and that and some discussions since then, are a bit belated for the minutes, but there's been some discussion in relation to Kangaroo Boat Boulevard's apartment and the pricing of the land. the General Manager has provided me with a written response, and I'm just asking whether or not he would care to table that response and take as a question on notice and include it in the minutes along with the other questions.
Through you, Mayor, thank you for the reminder, Alderman Mulder. To be honest, I'd forgotten that we had that conversation. If it's acceptable to the meeting, I'm happy to include that response in the minutes. I don't have it at my fingertips at the moment to read into the meeting tonight.
So be it.
Thank you.
I think we got up to Alderman James. Questions?
Thank you very much. I have two questions. Firstly, at one of our workshops recently, there was discussion about some three options for a provision of a seawall on pipe clay esplanade. Is it proposed that this matter be canvassed with the community in relation to their feedback as to which option may be, in their consideration, the best option for a seawall in a particular area?
Mr. Gray?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the workshop I explained I need to understand all the proposals provided by WRL at the moment and Water Research Laboratory in terms of the options, and to come back with council in terms of the pros and cons and the science of each of those before we can decide on whether we're going to go to the community and in what form. So I need to come back to a council workshop.
Thank you. Second question. Alderman
Second question is, following a question I put to the General Manager on Monday's workshop regarding a government valuation and when we would be receiving that government valuation with respect to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel and Hospitality and Hospital Training Centre. And given that the General Manager has made a comment in the working papers that there would, in his assessment, there is possibly a valuation on the land between 6 and 8 million. And that's in the papers that we discussed and was available to the public on that night. Given those couple of scenarios, in any potential buyback, would the government valuation play an integral part in the assessment on that land in any buyback process?
General Manager.
Thank you for the question, Alderman James. The request in terms of the government valuation was to inform council of what the current value of that land was, quite obviously. At this point in time, it would require a decision of council to explore that as an option. There's a number of options on the table, and I understand that we haven't explored those any further at this point in time. So, really, at this point, any valuation is a hypothetical consideration.
And it will be a matter for council once we're aware of what those figures are. I will stress that if we are embarking on a course of land acquisition and negotiations, we will need to consider some aspects of that in confidential session of council.
But that's understood, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
All I'm trying to ascertain here is that we are seeking a government valuation, and the two may marry or they may not.
Exactly.
They come out in the wash. Thanks.
Thank you. Yep. Alderman Pearce.
No, thank you.
Alderman Blommer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. The first one being that since the 12 October vote and time extension request from Shamble Australia, there's been a proliferation of unauthorised political stickers bearing the slogan "Buy It Back," being stuck on public infrastructure in and around Bellary Village, Kangaroo Bay and surrounding areas in our city. Mr. Mayor, I walk over the weekend, I counted more than 20 stickers crudely adorning publicly owned road and safety signs and council infrastructure such as bins, children's swings and picnic tables. So the question is, Mr. Mayor, can council please advise, one, the anticipated costs to remove and clean up this graffiti, and two, steps being taken to ensure the person or persons responsible is an authorised graffiti receive a bill for the costs so that ratepayers are not left to foot the bill.
Thank you. General Manager.
Thank you for the question, Alderman Blomley. The cost to remove stickers and graffiti will vary depending on location and things like the type of sticker and what it's stuck to and so forth. So it's difficult to give an accurate estimate, but it could be in the range of $15 to $50 per sticker, depending on where it is and what it's stuck to. We'd also need to do things like site assessments and so forth. So where stickers are in areas, for example, where there's high traffic, we might have to actually take traffic precautions to make sure of safety of workers, if that's the case. There is a provision in the Litter Act 2007 and also Council of Public Places bylaw that apply a financial penalty by way of an infringement notice for an offence committed, and also allows for the recovery of remedial costs, provided we have sufficient evidence to issue that infringement. We've had a look at those stickers. They don't have any identifying marks on them at the moment, so we would ultimately need evidence of the person or persons who are applying those stickers, and at that point we would probably be able to proceed.
Thank you, Stephen Angelo. My second question is, in July I lodged an Alderman's request regarding the barrier mesh surrounding the telecommunications pit at the intersection of Tanundle and Berry Streets in Howrah. In response, Mr Graham properly advised that Telstra owned the pit. They had been requested to undertake urgent repairs to the pit. As of 9 AM this morning, the pit is still unrepaired and the mesh fence is still in place. The only thing that appears to have occurred since this matter was first raised with council has been the growth of the weeds surrounding the fence. Mr Mayor, as a priority of this issue, please be actioned with a progress report to Alderman in the future in our weekly briefing reports.
Mr Graham.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we have contacted Telstra and they've advised they thought the pit was going to be just repaired, but on review the pit needs complete replacement. They go out to contract for that and they're going to advise us in forthcoming time period of when those works will be undertaken. I'll inform Alderman as soon as I know.
Thank you. Alderman Von Burton. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Spring has sprung and the grass has risen rather rapidly in many places. Now, I understand that our staff will be under some sort of profound challenges in dealing with some of the overgrowth that's really taking over quite a few tracks. Just today, I went or pushed past my way through the one on the Gilston Bay foreshore. My question basically relates to this sort of incidental thing. Pretty much happens most spring. Rather than just trying to make our staff work 24 hours a day, are there any adjunct things or auxiliary mechanisms we could be bringing in to tackle this when it sort of just hits us in one big hit most springs?
Mr Graham.
Through you, Mr Mayor, not really. It rains and sometimes it pours, and nice warm weather we're getting tomorrow. We are doing an audit very shortly on our tracks and trails, which we do wait for the sort of spring period to enact, and then we can see which areas we need to address. But council did organise some equipment for our workers this financial year, which should certainly help aid us to address some of the areas, considering how many kilometres of tracks and trails we do have.
Second question, and it pertains in part to page 29 of this agenda, which is the Sports and Rec Committee's quarterly report, and I'm hoping that this isn't a question Alderman Newing was just about to ask. But in the grant section it notes Healthy Tasmania grant, that Council will make an application to round 2 of the Healthy Tasmania Fund to request funding for the construction of a winter park at Nelson Park. Funding program closes 30th of October. This matter did come before us at a workshop. My recollection is there was pretty strong support for progressing this, and I also note that from recollection, Council was applying to use the same grant for an evaluation of fitness in the park. It's a two-part question. Is this correct? And if it is, then what priority would have been determined by Council as the main one going forward? Because my suspicion around the Council chamber is that it was the Ninja Park.
I'm not sure that in putting in grant applications we actually assign a priority to the 2 grants, but
Thank you, Mayor. No, we don't assign a priority to the two grants. The grant application that you're referring to regarding fitness in the park was a much broader grant than just fitness in the park, and the two were submitted and will compete on their own merits as part of that system. We expect that those grants around the state will be quite heavily contested at any rate, so at this point we don't know how many applications have been made. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I guess the answer is it's harder to win two grants than to win one.
Alderman Nichols.
Yes, I have a question about the intersection near Shoreline between Clarence Street and Anyway, the lights. Shoreline. Thank you. That's a bit embarrassing. But I'll put my have you given, when those lights were put in and since, I've just had quite a few people, parents mainly, raising their concerns with children crossing that road and suggesting that a turning arrow, both going on the Clarence Street part, would be a good safety improvement. I just wondered, since those lights have been put in, has there been any review of their operation? And if so, or if not, would the council consider putting in red arrows on the Clarence Street traffic?
Mr. Grant?
Through Mr. Mayor, I can get our internal traffic group to do an assessment in terms of if there's any crash history or any other issues. I mean, I know we did get some grant funding, I think, a few years ago, and we improved the left-hand turn coming up to Shoreline from the south, but we can undertake an assessment of that.
Perhaps all the minutes you could touch base with Mr. Graham later to precisely define it. Thank you. Second question. Alderman Ewing.
Look, only a quick one. I mean, because the petition, and I asked the question in the last meeting about the Kangaroo Bay buyback petition, and Mr. Mayor, you sort of quickly reeled it off, but I'd like to ask that we record that the actual question that was on that petition in the minutes, because my concern is that the question, because it's not listed in the minutes here, and it's not listed in the minutes of the actual petition item either. I'd like the actual question that's asked of people, and whether we had, and then the second one is whether we did an analysis of the people who were on the petition in relation to where they lived. It would be interesting to know that information.
So,
I think we have had an analysis of it, but I can circulate that to Alderman, and certainly we can record the question that was asked on the Kangaroo Bay petition as the answer to your question tonight, if that assists.
That would be appreciated. It's just that, I suppose my concern is that the question probably didn't reflect the full scope of what we were actually dealing with the other day.
It's probably fair that, General Manager, when we report on petitions, that the actual wording be reflected in the agenda box.
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, just one quick one from me, and that's really following on from the tribute and motion from yourself, Mayor and Deputy Mayor, earlier with regards to this year's Clarence Senior Citizen of the Year, Dal Highland's passing. He was obviously known and respected and loved by so many people in this community, but I did notice that one of the tributes from the family said, rather than sending flowers, plant a tree. Given his connection to the fort, is there an opportunity for us to explore something with Parks and Wildlife and Dal's family, Kath, just to look at perhaps planting a tree somewhere significant to where he spent so many hours volunteering? Not talking about a monument as such, but just planting a tree.
It's a nice idea. Manager, are we able to follow that up with Parks?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Alderman Knight.
I have two questions, mate. No, Mr. Mayor. Or not, mate.
Depends on the subject, I've noticed, Alderman Lott.
What is the situation with the lease of the Rosny Hill proposal if that proposal does not proceed to construction?
Thank you. There is no lease for the proposal at this point in time. We're waiting on the determination of the tribunal and for any appeal processes to conclude before we do any work on that.
So the situation will be is that they can apply for a permit. They can apply subject to the appeals tribunal, of course. What I'm getting at is if they get permission to build but then don't proceed to build, what's the question then? Would the lease be part of their building application?
No, the lease won't be part of the building application. It will be a consequent negotiation to the permit being confirmed. So to put it in perspective, they will, my understanding is that the proponents would need to have the lease settled before they can commence building, otherwise they have no basis on which to proceed.
And if,
so a permit on its own isn't enough.
So just the second supplementary I'm trying to get at is if we get to the point where a lease is issued and then the construction doesn't go ahead, does that obviously validate the lease?
It would depend on the terms of the lease, but it will certainly be an issue that we would be alert to and concerned about.
Well, I'm thankful that gives me a little bit of comfort.
And I would expect, General Manager, that a lease would be a decision of council.
Oh, absolutely, because it's a dealing in land. So yes, any lease will come forward to council.
My second question, Mr Mayor, is why does the state government propose a ferry jetty as an attachment to the breakwater pier, which is currently being built by council in Kangaroo Bay, when obvious sites like the existing one at Waterfront Hotel or the proposed Kangaroo Bay Helltide site are seen to be more obvious choices?
Through you, Mayor, the request that I received for clarification on council's position was simply that may be one site as an option. The conversation I've had with Department of State Growth is that the actual site will be a matter for each of the applicants to assess and put forward their proposals. So simply put, DSG wanted to know whether it was possible for us to consider the breakwater and pier structure as a possible site, not that it was the only site.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, because I understood that there may have been some issues around the depth of the water and existing moorings, given the landfill.
I'm not sure about that, Alderman Lott. Again, if there were those issues, that would be an issue for each of the proponents in their application to address.
Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of the open session of council. So at this point I'd like to thank the members of the public that have joined us online. We do need to go into camera at this point in time, and I would ask that the